I media trained you.
No, you didn't.
That's controversial.
It's controversial of kids.
Really good.
Okay,
It's
bye.
been a good one. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Mwah, 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 mwah. Oh my! Delete everything. Delete everything. Everything goes.
Pop singer David is facing first-degree murder charges in connection with the death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Yesterday, David Anthony Burke appeared in court for the first time, pleading not guilty. Hernandez's dismembered body was found in the trunk of Burke's abandoned car last September. Now, prosecutors say they're confident they can prove he killed the 14-year-old girl. But his attorneys say evidence will show he didn't.
In September of 2025, a tow yard in Hollywood called police about a smell coming from an abandoned Tesla. The car had been sitting for weeks. Nobody had claimed it. What investigators found inside would connect a viral pop musician to the death of a 14-year-old girl who had been missing for more than a year. In the days that followed, the public's understanding of what happened settled quickly around a familiar shape. A troubled runaway, a canceled tour, an artist under a cloud of suspicion he denied having any part in. Investigators, working quietly for months before any of it became public, were looking at a very different set of facts. This is Morbid True Crime, detailed documentary investigations focused on criminal psychology, forensic evidence, and procedural analysis. The case centers on Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a 14-year-old girl from Lake Elsinore, California. Her parents had immigrated from El Salvador and raised 3 children in the Riverside County community. According to family statements, Celeste loved to sing and dance, and Friday nights in the Rivas household were reserved for movie night. She attended Lakeland Village School. Neighbors described a girl who was, in the ordinary sense of the word, still a kid. One who had not yet finished being a 7th grader when her name first appeared in a missing persons report. Nothing about that report suggested it would still be unresolved a year and a half later, or that its resolution would involve a Grammy-adjacent pop star, a Tesla, and a set of Amazon purchase records. David Anthony Burke was, by the time of his arrest, one of the more unlikely success stories to come out of the pandemic-era internet. He began posting music under the name d4vd as a teenager, initially as a soundtrack for Fortnite gameplay videos on YouTube. His songs found an audience on TikTok almost by accident, moody, lo-fi tracks that spread faster than the platform he built them for. By 2022, his song Romantic Homicide had become a genuine phenomenon, eventually surpassing 1 billion streams. He signed with a major label, opened for Zay, and by 2025 was headlining his own world tour behind a debut album called Withered. He performed at Coachella. He was, by most measures available to the public, a 20-year-old having the best year of his career. None of that career trajectory was visible to Celeste Rivas Hernandez's family, or apparently to law enforcement, until charges were filed. Prosecutors allege the relationship between Burke and Celeste ran in parallel with his rise, beginning, they say, the same year he first went viral, and continuing through the year his album was released. Whatever else the evidence in this case ultimately shows, the timeline itself is difficult to look past. His most public year was, prosecutors allege, also the year he killed her. What the public knew in the fall of 2025 was this: a car registered to the musician known as d4vd, real name David Anthony Burke, had been towed from a Hollywood Hills street after sitting abandoned for days. Inside, badly decomposed remains were later identified through dental records as Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Burke, then 20, was on tour at the time the remains were discovered. His representatives said he was fully cooperating with investigators. He had not been named a suspect. For weeks, coverage of the case centered on open questions: how the car had come to be abandoned, how long the remains had been inside it, and whether Burke had any connection to the missing teenager beyond ownership of the vehicle. Rumors filled the space where confirmed information was absent. Some outlets reported the body had been frozen. Others reported decapitation. LAPD Captain Scott Williams, who led the department's robbery-homicide division on the case, later told reporters that neither claim was accurate. The vehicle had sat in the summer heat for over a month, he said, which made a partially frozen body scientifically implausible, regardless of what had happened before. The medical examiner deferred a ruling on cause and manner of death. A security hold was placed on the record. A step KTLA legal analyst Allison Triessel explained is meant to keep potential evidence from being compromised while an investigation is active, protecting both the privacy of the deceased and the integrity of the case. Triessel also pointed to the autopsy as likely the most determinative piece of evidence investigators had, noting that toxicology results alone can take 4 to 6 months to process, and that until a cause and manner of death were entered into the record, the case legally remained a death investigation rather than a homicide. For months, the case existed publicly as a mystery without a suspect. That was the version everyone saw. It was not the version investigators were working from. Former federal prosecutor Niyama Ramani, reflecting later on why the investigation took as long as it did, pointed to a combination of factors: severely decomposed evidence, the sensitivity of charges involving a minor, and a handful of uncooperative witnesses. He was also one of the few legal voices willing to publicly question whether LAPD had moved too slowly, calling the case a kind of dark cloud hanging over Los Angeles and saying criticism of the department's pace was warranted. Still, he credited investigators for prioritizing accuracy over speed. The more important job of a prosecutor, he said, is simply getting it right. According to a criminal complaint later filed by the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, David Burke and Celeste Rivas Hernandez first made contact in 2022 when she was 11 years old. Prosecutors allege that a sexual relationship began in November of 2023 when she was 13 and he was 18. That timeline did not surface until Burke's arrest in April of 2026, nearly a year after Celeste's death and 7 months after her remains were identified. For investigators, establishing it required piecing together phone records, digital evidence, and a welfare check that had happened over a year before anyone knew her name would end up connected to a homicide. In February of 2024, Celeste was reported missing for the second time that year. Riverside County Sheriff's deputies, reviewing her phone records, identified Burke's number and called him directly. According to court documents, he told deputies he had last spoken with Celeste on February 13th or 14th, but claimed he didn't know she was a minor and didn't know she'd been reported missing. Deputies weren't satisfied. They arranged for Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies to visit Burke at his West Hollywood home that same day. According to the complaint, they told him directly, Celeste was 13 years old and she was a runaway. Burke again said he was unaware and claimed he had only met her in person once, the previous November. This exchange would later become central to the prosecution's case. It is the moment the district attorney's office points to when arguing that Burke cannot claim ignorance of Celeste's age going forward, a claim his defense has nonetheless indicated it intends to make. 2 days after that visit, Celeste returned home. According to reporting on the case, her parents took her phone. Prosecutors allege that Burke found another way to reach her, driving to Lake Elsinore and paying one of her classmates to deliver a new phone he had purchased for her. What investigators describe is not a simple predator-victim dynamic frozen in time, but a relationship that, according to text messages later entered into evidence, involved real volatility on both sides. Court testimony detailed a text exchange from the night before Celeste's death. The two had argued over Burke's continued friendship with another woman. According to testimony from an LAPD robbery homicide detective, Celeste's messages that night were furious. She wrote that she would kill him, she threatened to strangle him, to tell her father damaging things about him, and to end both his career and his life. Investigators say the exchange, on its face, reads like the end of things, but the messages that followed did not match that reading. The next day, April 23, 2025, the date prosecutors allege she was killed, Celeste asked to see Burke again, telling him she would give him, in her words, one more chance. At just after 10 that night, she texted that she was almost there and asked him to leave the door unlocked if he was home. He replied that the gate was open. Investigators believe she died within about 20 minutes of that final exchange. She never sent another message. It's the kind of contradiction that resists a clean narrative. A threat one night, a reconciliation the next, and then silence. Investigators have not offered a theory of why she returned. What the evidence does show, according to prosecutors, is what allegedly happened once she did. The criminal complaint against Burke includes a count of first-degree murder with 3 special circumstance allegations: that the killing involved lying in wait, that it was committed for financial gain, and that it targeted a witness, meaning prosecutors allege that Celeste was killed specifically to prevent her from exposing the relationship before the release of Burke's debut album. He also faces 1 count of continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14 and 1 count of unlawful mutilation of human remains. Much of the physical evidence presented at Burke's 5-day preliminary hearing centered on purchases prosecutors say he made under assumed names in the days after Celeste's death: chainsaws, a body bag, a laundry bag, a shovel, and an inflatable pool, all delivered to his rented Hollywood Hills home. Investigators later recovered plastic fragments from that pool embedded in Celeste's remains, which they say ties the item directly to how her body was handled after death. A criminalist testified that Celeste's DNA, extracted from remains found at the property, matched blood evidence collected during the search of Burke's home. Financial records introduced at the hearing showed Burke had grossed more than $10 million between 2023 and 2025, evidence prosecutors used to support the financial gain special circumstance, arguing that exposure of the relationship stood to cost him his career at the exact moment it was taking off. Detectives also testified to recovering a substantial volume of digital material from Burke's devices and cloud storage, more than 40 terabytes in total, which they said included child sexual abuse material. Investigators have not said how much of that material, if any, depicted Celeste specifically. Text records spanning from late 2023 through April of 2025 were also introduced, including messages investigators say document a pregnancy and its termination when Celeste was 13. The specifics of those exchanges were not read into the public record in full, and this documentary will not reproduce their content. The fact of their existence is what matters procedurally, and it's disturbing enough on its own. Ahead of the preliminary hearing, Ramani told reporters the proceeding would center on 3 themes: sex, violence, and drugs, and predicted the prosecution's case would be difficult for the defense to overcome. He also raised as a possible defense theory the idea that Celeste may have died accidentally of an overdose, with Burke panicking afterward and dismembering her body to conceal it. Of the 3 charges Burke faces, Ramani noted mutilation of human remains as the least serious, meaning a defense strategy built around avoiding the murder and sexual abuse charges, even at the cost of conceding the mutilation charge, would still represent a significant win for Burke's legal team. Triessel, for her part, flagged one avenue prosecutors would likely be barred from using: Burke's own lyrics. She pointed to a 2022 California law passed specifically to prevent an artist's creative work from being used against them in court, noting that even lines that might read as confessional would face a high legal bar before a judge would allow them in as evidence of intent. Piecing the physical evidence together, prosecutors allege the following sequence. Burke ordered Celeste a rideshare to his Hollywood Hills home on the night of April 23, 2025. She arrived sometime after 10. Within roughly 20 minutes, prosecutors say, he stabbed her. The medical examiner later ruled her cause of death as multiple penetrating injuries. What followed, according to the criminal complaint, took considerably longer than the killing itself. Investigators allege her body remained in Burke's possession for weeks, and that during that time he purchased the tools later found linked to her remains. He continued his public schedule during this period, including at least one radio interview, and prosecutors allege he continued texting Celeste's phone after her death, an effort, they argue, to construct the appearance that she was still alive. At some point before Burke left for the second leg of his tour, his Tesla, the vehicle in which her remains were ultimately found, was parked near the rental property and, according to surveillance footage cited in the complaint, left there. It sat for weeks before being towed. This is the part of the story where the 2 timelines the documentary has been tracking finally meet. The public version, a canceled tour, an abandoned car, a mystery, was, according to prosecutors, the direct downstream consequence of the private one. A relationship investigators say began when Celeste was a child, and a killing they allege was carried out to keep it that way. What stands out to investigators in this case isn't a single behavioral red flag. It's the length of the runway. A relationship prosecutors say began when Celeste was 11 did not stay static. It escalated in stages, each one seemingly absorbed into a kind of normalcy. A first meeting, an alleged sexual relationship 2 years later, a direct warning from law enforcement that went unheeded, and finally what prosecutors describe as a calculated decision to protect a career by eliminating the one person who could end it. Detectives have not characterized Burke's public behavior in the weeks after Celeste's death as erratic. If anything, the pattern described in court is the opposite. A continued tour schedule, a radio interview, ordinary public engagements running alongside what prosecutors allege was the deliberate concealment of a body. Investigators have focused less on any single outward sign of guilt and more on the documented sequence of actions that followed her death. The purchases, the timing, the continued texts from her phone. In cases like this, the psychology tends to live less in a dramatic before and after and more in the discipline required to keep two completely different lives running at once. Burke was arrested on April 16, 2026, following 3 grand jury hearings held under seal. He was arraigned 4 days later and pleaded not guilty to all charges. His attorney said in a statement that the evidence would show he did not murder Celeste Rivas Hernandez and was not the cause of her death. At his preliminary hearing in late July, prosecutors called more than 10 witnesses over 5 days, including LAPD detectives, a criminalist, and the medical examiner. On cross-examination, Burke's defense suggested Celeste may have taken her own life. A line of questioning the medical examiner testified did not change his conclusion that injuries were most consistent with an attack, though he acknowledged he could not determine who had wielded the weapon based on the autopsy alone. The defense has also indicated it will argue that Celeste's family was aware of the relationship and implicitly permitted it, an argument the family's attorney, Patrick Steinfeld, has strongly disputed. Pointing to the February 2024 welfare check as clear evidence Burke was directly informed of Celeste's age well over a year before her death. On July 27, 2026, Judge Charlene Olmedo ruled that prosecutors had met the burden of probable cause on all charges and special circumstances. Burke was ordered to stand trial and remains held without bail. District Attorney Nathan Hochman has said his office is weighing whether to pursue the death penalty. Arraignment on the trial charges is scheduled for August 31st, with a trial date expected within roughly 90 days of that hearing. None of this constitutes a finding of guilt. The preliminary hearing standard is a low one. Probable cause, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and Burke's attorneys have signaled they intend to contest the prosecution's version of events at trial. Reacting to the ruling, Romani said he saw little room left for a negotiated resolution. Asked what kind of plea deal prosecutors might realistically offer, he was blunt. There wasn't one to be had, he said, given what the evidence appeared to show, and it would be difficult for prosecutors to justify any discount in a case built on these allegations. The scrutiny on Burke has extended beyond the courtroom. During the preliminary hearing, a fake song professing love for Celeste briefly appeared on Burke's Apple Music profile after the account was reportedly hacked. Criminal defense attorney Lou Shapiro, who has no connection to the case, described it as drawing intense attention both locally and internationally, and said the hacking incident only added to an already difficult environment for the defense. It's tempting, in a case like this, to let the scale of the digital evidence and the strangeness of the purchase records become the story. Chainsaws and inflatable pools make for a certain kind of grim shorthand. But what investigators ultimately reconstructed here was not a single moment of violence. It was a gradual series of documented choices made over roughly 3 years by an adult who, according to the evidence prosecutors have presented, was told more than once exactly who Celeste was and chose to continue anyway. Celeste Rivas Hernandez was 14 when she died. Before any of this, she was an 11-year-old who liked Hello Kitty and walked to the corner store with her backpack. Her parents reported her missing 3 times in 1 year, which is its own kind of quiet alarm. The sound of a family sensing something was wrong long before anyone else was in a position to intervene. Her family has said simply that all they want is justice for Celeste. Whatever the trial determines, that's the part of this case that isn't in dispute. Thank you for watching Morbid True Crime. Subscribe for more documentary investigations examining the psychology and evidence behind real criminal cases.